Welcome back to the A-Flo Show podcast. Another episode for you here today. Also an interview for you today. We're talking a little bit of Texas Tech hoops as the Red Raiders are 6-1 on the season. They fought to Seton Hall last Thursday, but a home game coming up on Tuesday against Nevada for that one. We welcome Carlos Silva, the beat writer for the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, AJ Media. And Carlos Silva, I guess, coming off of Madison Square Garden. How was that trip there at MSG?
It was a pretty good trip, man. Obviously, a lot of history was made there. Unfortunately, Texas Tech was unable to do that, as you kind of alluded to. They dropped a big game to Seton Hall, 89-79, a game where you kind of felt like it was an NCAA tournament atmosphere just in terms of the neutral court, although there are a lot of Seton Hall fans there that were clearly cheering for the Pirates. So, as Justin Gray mentioned after the game, it was more of a road game there for them, but certainly something that they can learn from, gain some teaching tools from that game as they go into Nevada.
I was curious, was that your first time going to Madison Square Garden?
That was my first time to be inside Madison Square Garden. I've actually been outside the arena when I visited before in New York, but that was my first game covering a game there in the Garden.
Carlos, from the game itself, what was good and what was bad? What did you see from the team?
Well, the good was they forced 15 turnovers against Seton Hall, which is certainly what you want to see. That's what their identity is to force turnovers, get deflections, obviously score off turnovers, which they were able to win. I believe they won that 20-12 to Seton Hall. They were also scoring well in the paint with all the guys that they have with Tommy Hamilton, Lawrence Odiase, Zach Smith. They won that battle 40-32. And then, of course, the bench scoring. I know everyone talks about the 5 seniors they start, but you get some great additions there with Zaire Smith, the freshman, of course, Jarrett Culver, the freshman as well. They were able to help the bench outscore Seton Hall 34-15. So those are the good. The bad for Texas Tech on the defensive side, they weren't able to guard the three-point line. And, of course, that was kind of due to the fact that you have a really good forward in Angel Delgado for Seton Hall. He got 12 points, and then, of course, he had his 5 rebounds. But the biggest thing was he was kind of asking Texas Tech to double-team him to get the ball away from him, and he was able to, on 3 of his assists, get to 3 of his guards or a forward that was on the three-point line, and they made 11 out of 20. And it's very tough when you give up 33 points from the three-point line to kind of get in a good position to win for Texas Tech. And they were in it late in the game, but unfortunately some mental mistakes disallowed them to kind of at least keep up and get the win there in Madison Square Garden.
Speaking with Carlos Silva of the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, covers Texas Tech basketball. Now, before the Seton Hall game, you're 6-0. Morale's very high, especially here with this fan base. Morale being very high, but could a loss like that maybe hurt not only for that first loss of the season, but just going forward, and maybe the Red Raiders could struggle here a little bit now?
I don't necessarily think so. Chris Beard has this deal where he calls it the 12-hour rule. I know he mentions it, that he obviously studies a bunch of football coaches. I believe Nick Saban's the one that has the 24-hour rule where whether you win or lose, you just kind of soak it in for about 24 hours, whether you win or lose, and then you kind of focus on the next one. Chris Beard mentions this 12-hour rule, and I think that was already in effect as we spoke to the players on Sunday. They obviously want to remember that they did lose that game because that's how you remember and you kind of learn from those mistakes. And then, of course, you get better as the season goes on. But I think the biggest thing for Texas Tech is the fact that they're going to be playing at home, and that's going to be the biggest thing for them is they're going to have a big home crowd. And I think a lot of the people in Lubbock, at least based on the couple home games that I've been able to cover so far, have seen the type of talent that has been kind of brought in by Chris Beard and his staff.
Like you said, moving on to the next game against Nevada, a team that made the tournament last year and is undefeated right now. What's the scouting report for Nevada?
Well, 2 guys, the Martin brothers, I know that they were on the radar of Texas Tech trying to get 2 very talented forwards out of NC State. They're both averaging in double digits. Caleb Martin and then, of course, Cody Martin, the Martin brothers, as I mentioned. They're both from Mocksville, North Carolina. Caleb's averaging 19 points per game. And then, of course, 5.4 rebounds per game. His brother, Cody, who's 6'7", 205, and they're both 6'7", 205. So, I mean, and they basically look the same. So you can kind of figure 2 brothers that look the same play almost the same way, although Cody Martin has 18.4 points per game and 9.1 rebounds per game. So he's almost a walking double-double. So certainly a very difficult task for Texas Tech because if you look at what they're able to do there, you kind of look at what Angel Delgado was able to do with Seton Hall, and of course that is kind of asked for a double team inside, and they may have to do that as well with Nevada. But the biggest thing kind of taking in is the fact that Nevada has 4 true road wins so far this season. Texas Tech is 4-0 at home. They were only 16-3 last year at home, and those 3 losses came in the Big 12 play. So certainly this is not necessarily an NCAA tournament game, but certainly something where you can kind of take away and say, hey, this could be a Big 12 type atmosphere, which is what Chris Beard called the game against Seton Hall. We'll see how the Texas Tech Red Raiders are able to take in that atmosphere and see if they've learned from the loss that they had against Seton Hall last week.
You mentioned the 5 seniors starting their last game against Seton Hall. And Carlos, I know it's still extremely early in the season, but do you sense that we're not necessarily getting enough out of this senior class or this starting 5 from the seniors when it comes to performance on the court?
Well, I honestly think it's still early in the season, and necessarily I don't know if it's production, because there are certain roles that guys take, like a Keenan Evans, he's looking to score or he's looking to pass. Justin Gray's looking to be a defender. Naeem Stevenson's looking to obviously stretch the defense with his three-point shooting ability. Zach Smith is looking to beat someone off the ball with his athleticism, and then Tommy Hamilton is more of a guy that can be a spot shooter at the three-point line, or he can kind of get you some points with his back to the basket. And then, of course, you have the next 5 with Davide Moretti, the freshman out of Bologna, Italy. And then, of course, you got Jared Culver, as I mentioned before, Zaire Smith. And then, of course, kind of all the other guys that come off the bench as well, Brandon Francis and some other guys. And they all have their roles. And I think as long as they play their roles, which they've been able to do, as I mentioned before, the bench scoring outscored Seton Hall 34-15. That's what you want. Instead of kind of bringing in some guys and you kind of feel like you lost something, Chris Beard feels like if he brings in his reserve, so to speak, that you really don't lose anything in terms of athleticism or offensive scoring. And you've seen that with the way Zaire Smith plays defense, the way Jared Culver plays defense, and the way that defense turns into offense for that Red Raider squad.
Carlos, so far, how would you assess the freshman play so far with Zaire Smith and Jared Culver?
As expected, Chris Beard keeps mentioning the fact that the whole reason that they brought those 2 guys was because they knew that they could start, that they could get some minutes in the rotation, which certainly they've done. They're in that second tier class, if you will. They're coming off the bench, creating that spark, helping the bench scoring for Texas Tech. And I think when you look at what they're able to do, they're able to kind of play their roles, just play defense, create that spark, as I mentioned before, off the bench. And not only that, but then as they kind of log more minutes, Chris Beard kind of mentioned it on Sunday, at some point you're not going to call them freshmen no more because they're playing so well.
Carlos Silva joins us from the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. And one thing that I've noticed watching these freshmen is just they're not scared. There's no fear in the guys when it comes to playing at the D1 level here early on. I know it's still early. Conference play is going to come, and that may be a culture shock to them once conference play starts. But for me, just watching them, the lack of fear that they have playing on the court, it's fun to watch, and it makes me excited for the future.
Well, absolutely. And then when you look at that youthful exuberance, I don't even know if it's not having fear. Maybe they just don't know the stage they're on. But, I mean, when you look at the fact that you have 2 freshmen in Zaire Smith, he had 11 points. And, of course, you had Jared Culver, who had 17 points in a huge game against a team that is likely going to go in the NCAA tournament. Then, again, against Northwestern, against Boston College earlier in the year. I mean, it's not necessarily that they're not playing with any fear. They're just playing with a youthful exuberance where they're just playing because they love basketball. And the fact that they're able to do that is kind of what Chris Beard wants them to do. He wants them to play aggressive. He wants them to play without, not necessarily without fear, but I guess just basically he just wants them to play basketball. And that's what they've been doing because they know how to play defense and they know how to score. They know how to get to the rim, and they know how to finish. And I think that's been the 2, or technically the 3 biggest things for both of them is the fact that they've been able to succeed on the offensive end because of their aggressiveness on defense.
Carlos, you briefly mentioned Tommy Hamilton IV, the DePaul transfer. How is he doing this season, and just what kind of impact is he going to make on this team?
Well, certainly you have to like the fact that it's just another big man, especially with the fact that at least earlier in the year, you learned that Matt Temple's not coming back. He didn't get that extra redshirt year, so you definitely needed him. He was obviously waiting his year as he transferred from DePaul, but the biggest thing that you can take away is he's a little bit faster because he lost some weight. I know that the big story was he went, I want to say it was from 300 to about 250 pounds right now, and you can kind of see he's got a nice little step-back jumper that he's starting to work on. He can kind of go either way when his back is turned to the basket. But I think the main thing is just trying to see if you can get this Texas Tech Red Raider team to spread out the opposing defense with their shooting. If they're able to do that, that's going to give Tommy Hamilton a little bit more, I guess floor space to kind of maneuver, and not only that, but then find some of his teammates open, because that's one of the underrated things about him, is his ability to kind of find guys when they're kind of cutting with this motion offense.
And Carlos, in general, what are the expectations for this team in Big 12 play? I know the Big 12 is probably the best conference in college basketball, but what's your expectations for the team, and what's the team's expectations?
Well, I know just talking to the team earlier on, I know their expectation is to be that last team holding a title at the end of March. So obviously the expectations are very high. You have the talent to do so. It's just a matter of, can you kind of put it all together once that starts? And they certainly started off strong, as you mentioned. They started off 6-0, dropped that first game to Seton Hall. We'll see if they can show that bounce back, because that's one of the things that you learn from a team. And they've got a lot of seniors, as we mentioned before. They start 5 seniors, have a little bit of youthful exuberance with the freshmen coming off the bench. But if they're able to bounce back, it definitely shows some resolve, which is what you need in the Big 12, because as Chris Beard says, it's a gauntlet. With every team you play, every night, it's going to be a grind, and that's why you need so much depth, and that's why it's a good thing that Texas Tech has shown that they can have some guys coming off the bench. And when you play in Big 12 play, certainly, as I mentioned before, they only had 3 losses last year at home, and 3 of them were in the Big 12. So we'll see if that trend continues, or if they're able to kind of switch that a little bit and kind of get themselves maybe to that 8 or 9 win, heck, even 10 win kind of threshold there. Because if they do that, they're going to definitely be in a good position for the NCAA tournament this next year.
Carlos Silva from the Avalanche Journal. Carlos, next time we are in New York City, where do you recommend us making a stop at?
Joe's Pizza was a place I was recommended. Probably the best cheese pizza I've had, because usually you're so used to putting all this stuff on a pizza, but when you have a really good tomato sauce and some really good cheese, it's a pretty good pie, man.
All righty, Carlos Silva from the Avalanche Journal. He'll be out for the Texas Tech Nevada game. Appreciate the time, Carlos. As always, have fun at the game, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Appreciate it, man. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Carlos Silva from the Lubbock Avalanche Journal taking the time to join us.